Welcome to the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, where there's always another secret.
Hello, Sixers, and welcome back to another episode of the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies. This is episode 81, and tonight is April 12th, 2021. I'm Bill, and I'm joined, as always, by my limited co-hosts, Amy and Jordan.
Limited?
Welcome, guys.
Ouch.
I think this is the most insulting intro that we've had so far.
In context, it's going to be good. I almost said limitless, but in context... you will recognize that this is a compliment.
No, it works especially tonight because my wrist is unhappy today. So, but I got to hold a little baby. So that kind of balances it out.
I don't know. I don't think I have no limits. And I think I'm frankly far more interesting by what I can do than what I can't do. Because frankly, what I can't do is a large list and it encompasses like everyone else.
Anyway, before we get started, we do want to remind our listeners that the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies is not a spoiler-free podcast. That means if there is something in the Cosmere you haven't read and are worried about hearing spoilers, you might want to go read those first, then come back and join the discussion. Tonight, we're not focusing on a lot of specific Cosmere plot points, but they absolutely could come up because we're talking about, we're going to be listing examples. Tonight, specifically, we are going to be going back to some Sandersonian basics as we talk about Sanderson's second law of magic. For those of you who listen to the podcast recordings or watch the videos on YouTube, we want to remind you that it's possible for listeners to interact with us live via chat as we record each episode at www.twitch.tv/innkeeperstable. We record episodes of the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies every other Monday night, starting at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 p.m. Eastern. So please join us, take an active part in the discussion. The show is made possible by the support of our listeners and patrons. It will, of course, continue to be free, but if you want to help us out, you can head on over to patreon.com/Cosmere Studies. Even pledging a couple bucks per episode really helps us out as we work to improve the show. Patrons get immediate access to our Discord channel, where we have a lot of great discussions going on with a bunch of Cosmere fans. We talk about the Cosmere, we talk about the show, we talk about pretty much anything. It's an awesome community.
And frankly, there's been a lot of really good gifts lately.
Yeah, there have.
And puppies and everything else. It's great.
There always are.
And our old friend
that's
doing
just the way it's awesome.
And our old friend doing a read through of Rhythm of War and him posting as he went through was hilarious.
It's been wonderful. You also get early access to bonus episodes, exclusive access to other bonus content, and other good stuff. This week, we want to thank one of our probably freshest patrons. He or she joined right before we went live. I'm not sure how to pronounce this first name. It's either Ivor or Yve G. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it. You're awesome. So thanks for being here. Okay, guys. So Sanderson's second law of magic. Now, let's do a brief reminder for our listeners who may not be aware. Brandon Sanderson, in terms of writing, has come out with what he calls Sanderson's 3 laws of magic. Sanderson's first law states that an author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands that magic. We actually discussed this during episode 49 over a year ago at the end of January 2020.
Uh-huh. It's been a bit.
And that was actually a fun discussion. So if you want to, if you want to go back and check that out, definitely do that because it was a lot of fun. Now, Sanderson's second law. First off, the way he writes this one is really hard to...
I think Jordan has to say the second bullet point because I don't know how to say it.
I refuse to say the second bullet point because he's right. That does drive me crazy.
Okay, so Sanderson's second law is limitations are greater than powers, meaning limitations are more interesting than abilities.
Yeah.
He also wrote in his essay on this, Or if you want to write it in clever electrical notation, you could write it this way. Omega greater than bar, vertical bar. But that would probably drive a scientist crazy.
Yeah, because it's wrong.
But is it?
Yes. Okay. No. Brandon's the one who invoked this, so I have to explain. Ohm is what is the omega. That's resistance in a circuit, and that bar I think is supposed to be an I for current, and so this is wrong for multiple reasons. Resistance is not a limitation. That's just how slowly something moves through, and more importantly, the current. There's a word for power in physics. It's called power. It's a thing. It matters. It's work done over time. Just use P for power.
Okay, Jordan, breathe.
No.
I mean, Jordan's going to burn down my house, and it's all Brandon Sanderson's fault.
It was going to be the 2011 St. Louis Cardinals. Now it's going to be Brandon Sanderson's port. Look, this is why you don't let just people who only take 1 year of physics do physics stuff. I'm not trying to write books. He needs to not science.
Okay, so what is Brandon talking about in this? Like, what does he mean?
There's lots of like, magic can just do everything and fix all the problems, and if that's the case, then it's not very interesting. It's I know you mentioned Superman, or he even mentioned Superman in his long essay where he explained.
We talked about it a little bit last episode.
Yeah, and so like if Superman can just do everything and fix all the problems, then it's really not that interesting. It's when he's limited or there's things that stop him from just being able to do whatever that makes the story.
Yeah, if you go in and just, a problem arises and you could say, I fixed it. There is no conflict. Your character is a Mary Sue. And
or Gary
there's
Stu.
just nothing.
That's
or
the
Gary
male.
Stu.
That's the
Whatever. But basically, it's just boring. Because that's what makes stories interesting, is conflict, is resistance, is, something pushing against it. Yeah, Doc in chat says there's no drama.
Yeah. Think about the video game. What happens once you have all the things and nothing can stop you? It's just not fun anymore. Like, it's fun maybe for the first little bit, but then after that, it's just not fun.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy jumping on rooftops in Assassin's Creed 2 now that I don't have to worry about doing anything. But yeah, it would get boring after a while.
Mm-hmm.
That just seems like you've changed your game from Assassin's Creed to
parkour. It's fun.
Which, that was kind of the elevator pitch for Assassin's Creed in the first time it came out. But so it's a really interesting concept because when you look at Brandon's magic systems, that's where he starts having fun. Like, one thing I've noticed, for example, if you look at, let's say look at Mistborn. The steel pushing, it has to, Brandon mentions this in his essay. There are a couple of limitations on it. First off, it has to be metal, or you can only push on metal objects. Mm-hmm. But second off, weight matters.
Yep.
If something's heavier than you, it pushes you back.
And if you're heavier
that's
than it,
technically a limitation. But that's where Brandon starts experimenting. Because if it pushes you back, then if you put it on the ground and you push, it pushes you up. And suddenly, one of the major entertainment portions of the Mistborn series, the steel pushing and jumping and flying through the air, comes from that limitation.
Yep.
He's just sort of rechanneled it into a new area and had fun with it.
Yeah, that whole scene of him sort of training Vin for the very first time highlights a lot of this.
Exactly.
Because it's Kelsier, as a good teacher should, explaining what it is that you can't do. Explains, like with pewter, that a lot of people who are novices with it, they'll burn it and then run out and then get crushed by something because they've run out. Or they'll push themselves with pewter far further than they should have, and then when they finally stop burning it, then they die due to wounds.
They've broken themselves, yeah.
Because they feel invincible. Then there was tin, I believe. because you can use loud noises and like torches to blind or deafen someone.
Right.
And then he just goes through a bunch of the powers and shows her what it is you can't do with them.
And what you have to look out for when you're using those particular powers.
And what that does is it gives you something to overcome. You know, and so
or play with.
Suddenly there's a story. Yeah, like something to play with as well. But like if there's something that you can't do, people naturally don't like having something that they can't do, and so they try and figure out a way around that barrier.
Well, one of the best examples of this, going back to Mistborn, is Vin's fight with Shan, where she realizes if we're just doing straight Mistborn on Mistborn, I will lose because she has more adium, and adium is this story's version of God mode. And frankly, it's so broken. But when you're burning off a piece of a god, I guess that's allowed. That's a limitation for the record. But she realizes when you have that, you feel invincible, and she takes advantage of that, and she stops it for just long enough to get her in, rope-a-dope her, and then burn it, and then suddenly, boom, gotcha.
She's crafty.
So in the essay, which you can find on Brandon's website in his blog, or you just do a Google search for Sanderson's Second Law and it'll come up. We'll also put a link in the show notes as well, so if you want to check that out. But he refers to sort of 3 different ways to limit something. He mentions constraints, which basically means you can't do this. It's impossible to do something outside of this. There's weaknesses. Prime example, Superman has kryptonite. Things that, you know, can counteract what you're doing. And there's costs, something that you need to pay in order to access this power. This is one of my favorite ways of doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, the classic in D&D, in basically any typical magic system, they'll have their form of mana, you know, magic juice. And you only have so much before you have to recharge. That's sort of the way it works in most games that have magic as an issue. They'll have magic points or mana or some other name for it.
Yeah, I found an old video that Sanderson did over at Jordan Con, I think like in 2011, so a while ago. And he was talking about this, and one of the things he talked about is how the costs have to be real costs. One of the reasons he talked about is like he brought up D&D, and he's like, you know how D&D has spell components? You know, it's like, oh, you need a raven's feather to do this and stuff, and everyone's like, yeah. And he's like, that's not a real cost. He's like, because everyone always has the component, and the only time they don't have the component is when the DM basically comes in and says, no, we took away your components, because he just wants to force you to solve a puzzle without magic.
Well, I mean, like if you've ever played, if you played World of Warcraft back in the day, there were certain spells that required components, but it wasn't, in that instance, it wasn't an interesting limitation. It was just obnoxious.
You had to grind through stuff to get the components so you could do the spells.
Well, no, it's not grinding. You just have to buy it.
Oh, okay.
And it's a simple buy. And so you either have a stack of, you know, 1 million of them, or you forgot your stack and you just don't have it. So you have to go back and get it and then come back. But it's just sort of it wasn't interesting. And so they actually removed it in later patches.
That said, it was very interesting when I jumped off a cliff as a priest and tried to cast Levitate on myself and found out I did not have any more light feathers. But it was interesting only until I hit the ground, and then it was over. And
so, like you said, the cost has to matter. Yeah. You know, in that the cost was, I spent 2 silver pieces at the shop. You know, that's not an interesting cost. That's just did you go through your checklist beforehand, and so it doesn't lead to an interesting story per se.
Yeah.
But for example, he brings up in Lord of the Rings, every time Bilbo or Frodo puts on the ring, they get a little bit closer to losing a bit of themselves. Like Frodo gets more and more paranoid as he carries the ring farther. Yes, he can put this thing on and get invisible, but there's a cost. It takes something out of him.
And the Nazgul can see him when he's wearing it.
Another example, if you look at...
I don't know if that's just movie or not, but...
Yeah, another example, if you go back to Harry Potter, the Horcruxes.
Yeah, you can be immortal, but then you're...
Technically, you're able to create something to sustain your life, but it breaks off a piece of yourself. You're giving something up.
Well, and by staying in Harry Potter, you can make someone immune to the killing curse. You just have to sacrifice yourself out of love, and then you gotta. It's great. It's wonderful, except for the part where you die.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of aspects. Brandon is working on a book called the Silence Divine, I believe is the Ashen one. And the concept behind the magic system there is you get sick, and when you have certain diseases, they grant you certain abilities. So that one, the cost is actually inherent because it's the illness itself that gives you the ability.
Yeah, another one that was interesting that Brandon pointed out. Now, I've never read Wheel of Time, so I don't know the exact mechanics of it. But
I know this one.
Yeah, the magic in Wheel of Time, where the more you cast it, the more insane you get.
But isn't it just the men, right? It's
just the men. The concept is, centuries ago when there was the great battle against the Dark One to seal him away, at the end of sealing him away, and this is all early stuff that you find out, at the end of sealing him away, he did like a counterattack right before he was sealed away. And it tainted the male half of the source, which is where magic comes from. And so there was a touch on, and so whenever men used it, the more they used it, the more likely they would be to gradually go insane. And so casting magic spells has a cost. You go absolutely mad.
Yeah, and it seemed like it took a social cost on it I got partway into the second book. I need to try again. But like men were not allowed to do magic, or it was just super, super taboo because they'd go crazy, and people don't want crazy magic users running around.
Yeah. The idea of someone getting more powerful and more insane at the same time seems like a bad combo.
Yeah.
Oh, and it shows up. It shows up hard.
Yeah, another common one that, especially in more classical fantasy, that they focus on is just time and study. Like
there was it's with Harry Potter as well as with Harry Dresden. It's you have to know the spells, you have to know how to channel it right and other things. And I mean, with Harry Potter, it seemed to be as much how you move your wand as how you pronounce the words and all the other things. But that was softer magic. It wasn't as focused on the magic spells in that one.
Yeah, I feel like Doctor Strange did a good job of sort of visually showing this because they have that sequence of him studying and learning and figuring it out. This is a lot of times where you get the training sequence in a movie.
The training montage, except it's
like this is the cost that they're paying to access.
It's just the bookworm version of Sylvester Stallone doing sit-ups in a gym.
And all the stairs, I'm reading all the books.
Okay, so that's costs. Weaknesses. Let's talk a bit about some good examples of weaknesses, both in and outside of the Cosmere.
So, have you guys read the Deathgate Cycle?
I have not.
So in that one, there's several different races, but like the two major like magic users are called the Sartan and the Patron, and they both use runes for magic, and they did things with planets, and so there's just several different planets, and there's one planet where if they get dunked in the water there, they can't access their magic at all. And that's like the one place where I remember that they couldn't, like, if they're wet, no magic. with that particular water. So that was kind of a fun one with that.
Yeah. That's not the one where Josh's character comes from, is it?
That's the one where his character comes from. Because his was a Sartan,
campaign.
and they had the runes tattooed on themselves, and so that's how they would do whatever spell it was, is they would touch that tattoo.
Interesting.
And then the patrons would dance and sing the rune.
I mean, the most famous of weaknesses is obviously kryptonite. I mean, that's literally the phrase. It's my kryptonite. And yeah, there's some very interesting ones in a lot of animes. One that I really like is, and I'm sure everyone's gonna just bring this up, My Hero Academia plays with limitations a lot and with weaknesses a lot, because everyone has just born with different powers and that have different things. So like there's one character who, she's a frog essentially. That's her power. But people figure out that if you get her cold, she, like a regular frog, she gets sleepy. And so she can't handle anything in colder weather. And then another person has the ability to just negate your ability to use your powers. But because he has to look at you to do it, that means his eyes are constantly getting dried out in a fight, because he has to keep his eyes open to keep you from using the powers.
It's like it's sort of like the Weeping Angels.
Yes.
In Doctor Who, yeah. Oh, those are scary.
Don't blink.
Don't blink.
Blink and you're dead.
But that's a great example of showing how what the powers can't do, i.e. move when you're looking at them, makes for an insanely compelling horror story.
I think I've only seen that episode once for good reason.
Everyone has watched it at least once because it's so good. It's
so good.
It's horrifying. But at the same time, again, is the fact that they can move really fast the interesting part? No, it's the fact that they can't move when you're looking at them. So you're forced to face them down.
You have to be focused on it the whole time.
And so that's the thing, is it's the chink in the armor. It's, okay, I see, it's almost the opposite of Chekhov's gun. You know, Chekhov's gun, if a gun appears on a mantle in the first act, then it's going to be fired by the third act. In this one, if you see a chink in the armor, it's going to be exploited by the end of it. And you're trying to figure out how the heck are they going to exploit this? Yeah. How are they going to use this? Because it's such a small little crack. There's no way they're going to be able to get in. In The Hobbit, Smaug has the one scale that's missing.
And they have to aim for it.
And the archer fires with the black arrow and pierces through that one tiny opening. And it shows, because they're able to achieve this impossible feat, it makes them look cooler. I can't remember the term for that. There's a term in literature. It was really popular in like Beowulf times, where what they would do is they would build up this horrible thing, and they're like, and then I beat it easily.
Sounds like the Worf effect almost.
Something like that, except that the Worf effect is almost the opposite.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there's just all sorts of different ways. I've said for a long time, you can't have an interesting hero without an amazing villain. And because the villain tends to be the weakness, the limitation, the limiting factor on your hero. The villain is the one who can defeat your hero.
Yeah.
And for your hero to be able to beat them, they've overcome odds. They've gone through a journey. They've followed an arc. They started at point A. They went through all these different things. They ended up at point B. And because of the limitations, that's an interesting story. Without the limitations, they walked across the street and they had tea with their elderly neighbor.
And sometimes those are cute little stories, but they're not the big action.
But they're not these big epics.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have a physical villain though. Like
it can be nature or whatever else if you want.
Sorry, a good antagonist.
Yeah, because like
whether that's personified or not.
Yeah, because you can like, because you have one of my favorite examples is in Mistborn. The Lord Ruler is very not active in the story. He just sort of exists out there. He's from an interesting standpoint, he's not that interesting. The Lord Ruler is less the thing you're overcoming and more just the society that's been created around him. Now, eventually, Vin does have to face him down.
Well, and one of the main parts of the story is trying to figure out how to beat him.
Yeah.
I mean, at the very beginning, you have that amazing scene where Cosmere is talking to the crew, and he's just saying, "Okay, here are the steps that we need." Because each of these things that they're trying to overcome, those are limitations that they have,
and they're trying to bust through them.
He definitely feels like more of a force of nature, as Doc says in chat. The other thing that's interesting about it is just because we go on to limitations and constraints are the interesting part. Vin figures out, and she doesn't quite understand it. He figures out he's using Furukumi. And as soon as she figures that out, she's like, get the bands away from him. And so we see Furukumi's biggest weakness, you need to be able to touch the metal. And so once she does that, she takes advantage of it. And even though he has phenomenal cosmic power, once he can't touch
that edge,
once he doesn't have it, he's done. Like, and so it's like removing the keystone from an arch. It just all falls apart.
Just crashes.
And so that's another one I put down there. I just realized I was subconsciously quoting was genie powers in Aladdin. Like he gives the
cosmic powers,
and he gives the limits of what the magic can do. Can't kill people, can't make them fall in love, can't wish for more wishes.
It's can't bring people back from the dead. Wasn't it that?
Can't kill, can't bring back from the dead, can't wish. Wish for more wishes was sort of an outside.
No wishing for more wishes.
Wishing for more wishes.
Which is like, that's a fourth rule. What are you doing? But the actual limitation is if you are a genie, you are a genie. And so, and that's Aladdin figures that out right at the end. And even though he's beaten, figures out the only way to win is to trick him into wishing for the power, the golden handcuffs that is literally, actually, now that I think about it, the golden handcuffs of genie powers.
Yeah. Looking into the Cosmere again, in the Stormlight Archive, we have the Oaths. That's one of the major plot points in Words of Radiance. Is like Kaladin loses his ability and almost kills Syl. According to the Stormfather, he did kill her. Because he acted outside of the constraints, and it's sort of no, there are rules that you have to follow.
You made the oath, you got to keep it or else.
Exactly. And so he loses his abilities. I feel like Brandon handled it so much better than Spider-Man 2. Because
where he just loses the powers for no reason.
Because he doesn't want them.
I guess I don't remember that one.
But it's just... Yeah, it's so... Again, you have those constraints. There are rules to the magic. It's not just I can fly and I can do it however I want, and there are still constraints and limits to the magic.
And that's also a really good example of cost as well, because how do you get more power in that universe? It's only through severe personal growth and really looking at yourself and examining what it is that you are willing to do and change about yourself to get that power.
In a different way for each of the 10 orders as well.
Yeah.
I mean, like, for example, if you're looking at the Light Weavers, that right there is just a cost.
Oh, yeah.
You have to bear a part of yourself. You have to completely expose one of the most vulnerable aspects of yourself by speaking these truths. I mean, if you look at the truths that Shallan speaks, she killed her father. It's just that's a big admission.
Yeah. Well, and then on top of it, it's just I love the juxtaposition there, or the contrast, I should say, that the order that lies is the order that has to, in order to get better, you have to speak truth. You can't be trusted with these powers unless you're willing to be honest, which is a very interesting contrast.
It's also, if you look at what are the most speculated on things about the Cosmere, and particularly about the Stormlight Archive, what were people speculating about so much before Rhythm of War came out? What was Kaladin's next oath? What was the fourth oath, the one that he had never been able to say?
Literally made it like 4 of the questions of the title belt that we did.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is that's what people want to know. What is this limiting factor? What is holding him back, and how does he overcome it? So, like, limitations, they're interesting. How you overcome those or circumvent those limitations is also interesting. And it just sort of adds depth to characters. It adds depth to the magic systems. It adds depth to the worlds that you're exploring.
Well, and
It
even
makes them a lot more real.
even using the limitations can be very interesting. The Farukami being one of the best examples, where Brandon definitely tries to double dip and make both storing and tapping have their ability. Like, heck, like with weightlessness, that's a great one. Just the fact that there are times where you'd be like, why would you ever want to be heavy? And there's a few times you do, but otherwise being light's really useful. And same with I'm trying to remember which metal it is. Anyway, with connection, like why would you ever want to store connection? And it's like, well, while you're storing it, it makes it so you can speak the language of wherever you are, because you suddenly,
You
or when you tap,
No, that's when you're tapping.
Sorry, when you're tapping it.
Or tapping it, yeah.
It's, sorry, storing identity. It's like, why would you ever want to store identity? That's such a weird thing. Why would you not want to be yourself? Well, we get into all the hack stuff that they're now doing with medallions and storing identity. It lets you do some things you're not supposed to be able to do. I mean, and actually, that's a great, like, moving over to hemalurgy, like, what happens when you remove the cost behind something? Like, because in the Mistborn universe, it's mostly locked behind genetics. Like, that's the biggest thing that'll hold you back. But now they introduce a way to get the power without the genetics.
Well, and Brandon explores this whole concept from 3 different angles in Mistborn.
Yeah.
Because you have the net positive magic system in Allomancy, you have the net neutral in Farukami, and you have the net negative in Hemalurgy. Each of them still has their own cost, but it depends on where that cost is coming from. With Allomancy, the cost is literally internal. You swallow something and metabolize it from within.
Yeah.
With Farukami, the cost is from yourself, but it comes back to you full-fold. With Hemalurgy, it's an external cost because you're stealing it from someone else.
Yeah.
You're stealing both their
less
life
of it.
And you end up with less of it, exactly. And so it kind of breaks off pieces.
Well, and then the other limiting factor, the more you do it, the more under control of harmony it is. And so now there's a real cost to hemalurgy, because, someone non-evil is the one in charge of it. So bad guys now have to find a way to circumvent that.
Which is why we see, in Shadows of Self, it's so interesting because she makes sure to only have one spike at a time.
Yeah.
Because 2 spikes would put her under control. She's like, well, I can only go so far. So again, that's a different cost, but she's still working within the bounds. And that, again, is where it becomes interesting. There's a saying, creativity thrives within bounds. And what happens is Brandon has placed bounds, or all these authors have placed bounds on their characters and said, okay, now how can they become creative and work within these boundaries?
Well, I mean, that's why we're terrified of Roshar right now. He's a bondsmith unchained.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we don't...
Unhinged.
Yeah. It's like, what are we
what are his limitations right
yeah,
now?
what are
Not
we
much.
looking at? It's terrifying.
And again, that was a cost and a vulnerability that came with being becoming a herald, and particularly with breaking their oath, is because Brandon has said the madness of the heralds is supernatural in nature. Yes, there is an aspect to it where it's just guilt, but there is definitely a supernatural aspect to it as well. And so, they do have these powers, even without their honor blades, they're still very long lived. There are special abilities, but there are limitations and problems that come with it as well. It's the concept of the sword of Damocles, where there was a king, there was a man who wanted to be king, and he was, and so they said that he was placed on the throne, and he looked up and he saw that there is a sword hanging directly above his head over the throne, and it's the concept of, with this power, there's also an imminent threat. Because yes, you're the king, but you've also made yourself a target.
Yeah.
Didn't you have a sword of Damocles over your desk at one of your old jobs?
No, we talked about it. That didn't actually happen.
What? Oh.
No, but yeah, it's definitely true. Like, you got to have the costs and the constraint to make it interesting. Talking about God mode is only interesting for a brief moment. The one I can give example of is Half-Life 2, when your gravity gun suddenly becomes the uber gravity gun, and you're no longer limited to picking up objects. You can just pick up anything, including your enemies, and you just throw them around like they're nothing. And it's fun for like 5 minutes, and then it's just like, okay, well, it's a good thing the game's about to end, because
Yep.
this will wear thin real fast.
Yep.
So, I was picking Josh's brain about some different series that we could talk about. And did you guys read the Dark Sword series? I haven't read it, but my husband has, and he explained
I've never
part of it
heard
to
of
me.
it.
Anyway, so I think it's by the same authors of and now I can't remember what that's called. I talked about it. Deathgate Cycle. So Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman, I think. Anyway, but in that one they use mana for powering the magic, but wizards can use it, but they only have like a very limited amount that they can pull or they have within them. And so there's other people who are called catalysts, and they can't use mana, but it channels through them. So apparently part of the plot is dealing with the fact that you have wizards who can use the magic, but they need catalysts to actually do much of anything. So that's an interesting way of putting a constraint on things.
Forces teamwork.
Yeah, there was one I really liked. It was called The King's Blades. Have you ever read those? The concept of it is the King's Blades are these soldiers who have sworn themselves to the king, and they're actually bound literally through magic to the king. Where there's magic that's done, and at the end of this ritual, the king takes a sword, the knight's sword, and drives it through the knight's heart, and then pulls it out, and the knight heals, and they are then bound to the king. They are actually, there's a part of them that wants to keep him alive. There's a drive. Now, because of this, they're able to go on, like, they only need like 2 hours of sleep a night, and they gain physical abilities. They're much better soldiers, but they are bound to his will. And I remember the first book, there's a guy who's been training, and he's like the most amazing, he's been working hard, and he becomes this amazing soldier, and he's so excited to become the king's blade. And the king assigns him instead to bind himself to a minor lord. And the minor lord turns out to be this just absolute sleazeball of an individual. And he's bound to this man, and it's like there's a drive in him to protect this man's life. but he hates him. He absolutely despises him, but he has to fight with everything he has to keep him alive.
Oh, that would be hard.
And this is the limitation. He has all these amazing abilities,
But he's tied to a sleazeball.
but he can't do what he wants with them.
Another interesting way to play with stuff like this is to invoke the rules, but knowing them that someone isn't actually bound by what the rule is. One example I can always think of is the Kingkiller Chronicles. Kavoth is amazing at what he does. And so he wins a lot of fights because people go into it thinking he'll have similar limitations to them, but he doesn't. He can just, due to his skill, go much further into the magic than they can. The one that I didn't think about a magic system till this conversation, I suddenly thought of all things, the second of the new Star Trek films. Is that Into Darkness?
Into Darkness.
Okay.
Be, yeah.
The one where Benedict Cumberbatch is Khan. The big...
Spoilers.
Yeah. As if we aren't worth all thinking. Anyway, the one of the pivotal scenes is basically Khan holds all the cards and it's like, I'm going to give me my people or else I'm going to blow you away. And so Spock says, yes, you can have the torpedoes when he knows they're actually armed. And he's like, you can have them. And it's like, you do not try and cross me. And he tells him, he's like, as you know, I am Vulcan and I cannot tell a lie. Because Vulcans in this universe are so logic-oriented, they're terrible at telling lies. Spock is half Vulcan and actually not very good at being Vulcan at times, even though he's quite talented at it. That's part of his story beat. And so we know as an audience, oh, he's not, like, he can lie, but Khan doesn't know that. And so that's a situation where you invoke the rules knowing that they don't actually apply.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, no.
That is interesting, yeah. I hadn't thought about that.
It's a really interesting point. Now, Brandon does go into, he mentions this isn't tied only to magic. This is just sort of the way that he demonstrates these storytelling points and illustrates them through magic, because magic is, one, it'll hold people's attention. Two, it's a good way of, because fantasy novels and science fiction novels are in a genre referred to as speculative fiction. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that you can look at fantasy is, what would people do if anything was possible? If what is not possible now was possible? And so with magic, you can actually sort of explore this. Mm-hmm. And so these don't necessarily just apply to magic systems or fantasy novels.
Well, another, like, he invokes Superman. That is one of the costs for or one of the limitations, I should say, is his morality system. It's like Superman could accomplish anything, but the problem is, what are the costs to doing so? There's been a couple really good examinations of this with Superman. One is the mental cost. So there was a storyline, I want to say it was in the 80s, where Superman basically said, I can do anything. I should be helping out all the time. And so it's just Superman running himself ragged because there's always someone in trouble. There's never and he's like, I can't not do this because I have to. And basically it ends with him realizing he has to let some bad things happen because otherwise he's going to go insane.
Yeah.
Because we call this concept in real life anxiety.
Yeah. And so, but it was
overextending yourself. Yes.
It was a very interesting examination of his character. Another limiting factor, of course, is, his either weakness to kryptonite or the fact that he needs a yellow sun to power him. And there was a very awesome episode of Justice League where he gets sent, everyone thinks he's died, but he's actually been sent, far into the future. And the Earth's sun has burned itself out, and it's now a red sun. And so
he has no power.
So he has no power, and it's him trying to survive in this far-flung future. And it's one of these times where it's like, what's interesting about Superman? He's a farm boy. He grew up, you know, as someone who knew how to work with his hands, who knew how to fix things, and he knows how to survive. And it's all about him as a mere mortal still being awesome because he's a farm boy. And the last limiting thing for Superman is his code of conduct. He's decided to, you know, be a good person, and he doesn't want to kill people. And there's been
He's a farm boy.
Yeah, exactly. But it's very interesting, because this whole idea is he could do anything. Very similar to, you know, Joker trying to push Batman. They're trying to get them to break their code, because if they start breaking their code, well, it's going to happen. And the best place that was examined was in the Injustice video game series, where they say,
oh goodness,
what if Superman did break bad because someone, and it's the Joker of course, pushed him too far, and he finally just said, no, I have the power, I'm taking control, it's better this way. And it's like the cost is his soul, basically. He basically becomes this tyrant, and it's this whole and they just keep examining, like, this is why he's such an interesting character, is not because of what he can do, because it's what he can do is anything, but it's what he won't do with that power is what makes him interesting.
Yeah,
absolutely. Again, we've mentioned it before in this podcast, but that World of Cardboard speech at the end of Justice League.
Yep.
Where Superman talks about, you know, walking around, anything I do, if I lose control for even the slightest second, people could end up hurt or dead. And so he's just, you know, holding on all the time. And you realize, oh, that's one of the other things that we never even realized that makes him a hero. You know, he could break us by accident, and he is just being constantly vigilant that he doesn't. You know, and it's just like, okay, that's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
That he's having to spend mental resources on just not destroying the world around him by, you know, through thoughtlessness.
Yeah, I would not be a good Superman. I am so clumsy. I would break so many people by bumping into them. It'd be terrible. Oh.
Yeah, I love it when the limitation is a self-imposed one for the good of others. I think that's an absolutely fascinating concept to explore.
Yeah.
Another interesting limit is just when you only got one of them or something like that. And so you have this game-breaking thing, but you don't want to use it. And I always go back to the awkward zombie comic of... What are they...
Vulneraries.
Yeah, that one. And they never use the healing items because they might need them later. And so...
And they're limited.
Yeah. And so...
Well, or in any RPG, the elixir or the mega elixir, the thing that heals you back at full life, full health. And it's just like, I need this. And then you get to the final boss, and you've got a stockpile of like 30, and you use 3.
Yep. Oh.
Yep.
All the Coca-Colas I didn't use in Super Mario RPG.
Yep. In RPGs, everyone is a hoarder.
But the last thing you want to use is something too early. You might need it later. It could be harder later.
Oh.
But a game that actually plays with that really well is the Resident Evil series, because they don't tend to give you enough ammo for you to become a shooter. They want it to be... now, some of the later games, they've changed that up. But in the earlier installments, you had pretty limited ammo. And so you're pretty precious with your ammo. You're like, okay, do I need to start firing here? Okay, aim carefully. But the zombie's approaching to you. And so you're like, oh, it's too far away. Maybe I should let the zombie get closer so I don't miss this shot. Because again, limiting the resource suddenly makes it precious and suddenly changes your value system. Because the reverse is true. I remember in the first Steelheart book, the first bad guy I think we fight, I can't remember the name of the guy, but the very first guy, his superpower is that when he holds a gun, he never runs out of ammo. The result is he's a horrible shot, because all he does is just walk his shots everywhere. Because why would you ever aim?
You don't need to. Especially if you're evil and don't care about hurting more than your target.
Yeah.
So.
And so it's a very interesting look at how removing limits changes a person in his regard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just it makes you lazy. It's also why it's interesting in movies or books or shows where you have a character who is absolutely overpowered, and then that power is taken away, and it's just like, what's the saying? Take away your suit and what are you?
Yeah.
Millionaire or genius, millionaire or billionaire, playboy philanthropist.
Yeah, I can never get the order right.
But it's just like you take it away. What are you? Where do you come from?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you see these heroes with their superpowers taken away, and they keep going. Again, Kaladin in Words of Radiance, he doesn't have his abilities, and he goes after Moash, and they're just beating him down, and he keeps getting up, and he keeps walking to him, and it's just like, there is no way you can win. He's just like, I will stop you, and he just the Determinator is the TV trope's name for it, where they just keep going, and it's just like, you're more than just these superpowers.
Yeah. Because
you take them away and see how you behave without them, and it's a test to who you are. That's again, what's his name? Steve Rogers in Captain America.
Oh yeah.
No, I could do I could do this all day. But also when Tommy Lee Jones pulls the pin tosses the grenade.
He jumps
and
on it.
Everybody dives away, and scrawny little Steve Rogers dives on top of it.
Yeah, but he's still skinny.
But the fact that he's the skinniest one and he jumps on top of it, he has the most limitations at that point. Mm-hmm. That's what makes him interesting.
Yeah.
Because he's still going. He's standing up. He doesn't like bullies. He's standing up to it. Even though he's limited, that's why he's interesting.
Going back to your Iron Man example, and they actually start looking at that in Iron Man 3, where they remove his armor from the equation due to plot contrivance. Let's be real. Had he just enacted the party protocol right at the start, everything would have been solved. But we see him having to constantly MacGyver his way throughout that film, and it makes things much more interesting.
Alf in chat, she mentions, we're talking about Words of Radiance Kaladin, Rhythm of War Kaladin as well.
Oh yeah,
that's literally what happens is his abilities are taken away, and he keeps going. He starts John McClaning his way through everything,
and he has to use like that wrist thing and figure out how to fly differently, and that makes him learn his other surges better, the ones that he can sort of access partway through.
And then, but that also makes, then he gets, the fourth oath at the end of the book, and just the world explodes, and he's fighting without the weights.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still one of my best. The thing is, Kaladin he won a shard when he had nothing. Mm-hmm. Now he has shard plate. He can fly. He can stick you to walls. He has the Silsh spear. And on top of that, he actually now has a support group to help him deal with his issues. I don't know how you stop Kaladin Stormblessed now.
The one, going back a step, another interesting thing with him having to learn how to use his other surge that he hadn't worked on as much.
Right.
It made him harder for the pursuer and stuff to fight, because they weren't used to people fighting in that method. He had to get very creative in how he did it. Like, his movements were just so not what, Windrunners do. And so they're like, well, so he would be where they wouldn't expect him to be and stuff. So I appreciated that. It was fun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, we've talked about that in real life as well. We give this example a lot. We had a friend who was really good at Super Smash Brothers, but the way he got good was he and this other guy just played at each other all the time. Like probably 4 hours a day for a while. They would just fight each other all day. And don't focus on the fact that 4 hours isn't all day. Just move along. They went to a tournament, and the thing is, they weren't as good as these pros. Like, these are people who won actual prize money. But the pros hated fighting them more than any of the other pros because the pros were used to a certain style of fight. And then they showed up, didn't have that style of fight. They fought in a completely different way. And as a result, they caused them a lot more issues. And so with Magic, a lot of times, what's the limiting factor? The limiting factor is there's all this education and work that goes into it. But when someone comes outside of your field of expertise, suddenly all that study that and that cost you've paid has given you a limitation that you're too specialized.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is it? There's in the Dresden files, like Harry Dresden is the wizard, and he's always like running because he's like, yeah, I've got magic and can do all these cool things, but sometimes just being able to run really fast is super helpful in a fight. Because you can't rely on just one thing if you got to be more well-rounded.
Yeah, you want to see people overcoming impossible odds. Those are the stories that grip us. And when the danger seems real, it's more interesting. Well, when the limitations are real, it's more interesting.
Well, heck, me and Bill have been shotgunning our way through the game Hades recently. For those who don't know what it is, it's a roguelike, and it's got some really cool things because each weapon has different strengths, weaknesses. You get boons that give you different abilities. And a lot of times, you'll discover in an early run that, ooh, this boon is really powerful with this weapon. And so you keep trying to get it. Only they're not giving you that one. And you're having to suddenly have to figure out how to get further along in this campaign without the thing that's good. And it's forcing you to play in a way you're not comfortable with. And that's what makes the game so interesting is you can't rely that you're going to get everything that you want, and you just have to make do with what's there. Randomness is a cost sometimes. But seriously, that game is pure crack.
Yeah, and then simple, blatant, we've talked about some of the complex limitations that Brandon's involved. In Elantris, there's a really simple limitation. Location. If you're too far away from the city of Elantris, you can't access the magic the same way. Yep. It's location based, and when you hear that limitation, every single person I've talked to, they stop and they say, "Oh, that's interesting." Because when you have that limitation, suddenly you wonder, how can I make this limitation matter? How can I make this limitation fit into the story? And it's fascinating trying to figure out what's the problem, how do I overcome it?
It also makes things a lot more interesting when people ask who could beat who in the Cosmere, and you always have to ask, well, where's the fight? Because if it's in if it's in the middle of Elantris, suddenly we don't really even know the limits of what an Elantrian can do in the middle of Elantris. We've only gotten a taste of it.
Well, and that was just from Raoden's, cursory study, because, he's basically reading all the little scraps he can find, but he doesn't really know what he's doing. And suddenly when he gets just a little taste of actual power, he just starts to dominate. But if you have somebody who's fully studied and practiced in this, it's even more so. But again, it matters where they are.
Yeah. And it's going to make taking over someone else's kingdom very difficult in this world because you're fighting them literally where they're strongest.
Their home turf.
On their home turf.
Yeah.
But on the same world, very interesting playing with limitations is obviously Emperor's Soul. Like, the whole story's about her playing with limitations.
Yep. One of the main limitations is for you to affect something, you have to deeply understand it. She's given a man she's never met, and in fact has some very poor opinions of. And told look into his mind, understand him, connect with him so that you can fix him.
And then on top of that, she's also under time pressure. She's also under literal space pressure because she's just stuck in this one room. And
she has her life threatened pretty much every day by the blood The blood guy?
The blood
Who does
sealer.
that too?
Well, and she's trying to figure out, she has to escape. And she's like, okay, how do I escape this? And she has to engineer the scenario where his magic will no longer be as useful. And even with that, he's able to still chase her because he finds some of her blood after she collapsed through the floor and uses that to sick his
skeleton, whatever things.
Yeah. So she has her own limitations, and at the same time, she's trying to figure out how to maneuver her way through his limitations.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because in the end, she solves all her problems by knowing people very well. She's able to, what's the name of the other Regal? It's Gautona, and who's the
lady?
It was the lady. Lady Regal. I wish I remembered her name. The one who wasn't as clever as she thought she was.
Regal Gregorina?
Gregorina, yes. Gregorina. She's playing with the fact that, okay, I've got to hide the information so there's not enough for her forgers to finish my work. And I got to manipulate her into thinking she has me where she wants. I have to manipulate Gautona with honesty. I have to manipulate this guard that despises me and I know will attack me at the first chance he can. Frava, that's it.
Frava. I just found it right then, yeah.
Alfonsina for the win. No, and then we have to. So she knows the guard, knows he'll attack, so she weakens the bed so that it'll collapse when he goes to attack her because she knows he's aggressive. He'll come this way, and you just see her manipulate everyone with the cunning use of knowing them really well, which is not easy.
Well, and again, just realizing that the only way to manipulate Gautona is to be perfectly genuine.
Which Frava totally is like, no, it can't be the case because she doesn't believe Gautona either, from what I remember.
Right.
Yeah. Well, another great example of the limits being more interesting than the powers is Marsh training Vin, where Marsh explains to Vin, you don't always want a copper cloud up because if you're what's better, not being affected by emotional allomancy or being affected by it and knowing exactly which emotions someone's trying to manipulate in you.
Yeah. So you can play along until you need to get them back.
It's like on one, you're safe from being manipulated, but the other, you're getting more information than they are.
Right.
And it's just, again, showing the limitations being very interesting.
Yeah, and it shows that Kelsier was recognizing his own limitations in the fact that he sent her to all these different specialists instead of him trying to do it all himself. Thinking, like, I'm the Mistborn, obviously I should be able to teach you all of the things compared to these guys specialize. I can save more time for me as well as get you the better education that way.
Although this interestingly, that wasn't actually Kelsier's idea originally. That was
it wasn't.
It was Sazed. Sazed recommended it.
Oh, that's true.
Because Kelsier's like, I don't think I'm gonna have the time to teach her all the metals, and Sazed's like, you have all these people, why not do that? And but this shows one of Kelsier's skills is that he pays attention to his crew, and there's a reason he has certain people around to fix up his limitations. He knows that he's only good at certain things. And so he gets people to shore those things up, and he trusts them. Whereas you look at someone, you look at the Lord Ruler, in the end, he's alone.
He doesn't trust anybody.
Yeah, looking at outside, again, of magic systems, every interesting character has a fatal flaw. And, for Kelsier, it's his arrogance. And the fact that he's a psychopath. And it like that's what makes, again, characters interesting. It's not their abilities, it's their flaws. It's the gaps in their abilities. It's the chinks in the armor. We should probably start wrapping up soon. So are there any other particularly interesting examples that come to mind.
We don't have the time to go over them too much, but like the Lightbringer series, Josh recommended this one to me as well, because I've read the first one and I've forgotten a lot of the details, but that one, people can use one color of light and make it solid, and each of those different colors have different properties. And there's one person who can use all the colors, and then the story goes on from there. But it's just kind of interesting to see that each color of the magic has
Is
different...
that Brent Weeks?
Yes, that's Brent Weeks.
Okay.
So
The one who Brandon has said if he were to, knock on wood, heaven forbid, if Brandon were ever to meet an untimely end, Brent Weeks is who he said he would want to.
Because he's got really, really good books. They're way grittier, but they're very good. So.
And I'm just going to write this one down here.
Lightbringer.
That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I remember there's lots that goes on in it, and I've forgotten so many details from it, which doesn't help that I keep forgetting. I keep putting in details from his other book series, the Assassin one too. So that doesn't help either. But he's a very good author. So
awesome.
I can't if you find this concept interesting, I can't recommend My Hero Academia enough as an anime. Just they play with the limitations of people's powers in a very just excellent way. The entire series, I highly recommend it. If you find this to be interesting, check it out. I don't think you're going to be disappointed.
All right. We love hearing from our listeners, so please keep sending in questions. Ask us about the Cosmere, drop us topic ideas. Just ask us how our day is. Just make us feel appreciated and loved. We're needy that way. But honestly, we love hearing feedback, how you think we're doing, how you think we could improve as well. You can send all questions, suggestions, whatever you have in a brief, concise email to cosmerestudies@gmail.com. And hopefully, as we get interesting questions like that, we'll be reading those as part of the show. If you want to send us a physical letter or anything, we do have a P.O. Box at the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, P.O. Box 970063, Orem, Utah 84097. We also have cool stuff that we are doing. Amy, what are you doing right now that is awesome?
I held a baby today, so that was kind of fun because I babysat. But yeah, so I am actually, I think, 80% done editing my Mistborn Mistcloak tutorial video. So that should hopefully be coming out real soon. And I know I've been saying, oh, I'm doing it, but I really am almost done with it for real.
80% is higher than you were before.
Yeah, so I did
that
a
shows
lot.
Progress.
So, and I know how to do picture in picture. I'm moving up in the world. It's amazing.
Nice.
Yeah, it's
See, this is what we're talking about, limitation. She's putting the work in, she's studying, and look at the power she has wrought.
I'm Googling the YouTube videos on how to do things.
That's the secret to everything in life. Just find the tutorial videos. Like, seriously, everyone who exists now, you don't know what it was like as a kid when we didn't just have YouTube to tell us how to fix a very specific car battery. We just had to pay people.
I don't know how they did it. Anyway, my Facebook is Coincidence Cosplay and Props. My Twitter is @CoincidenceCosp because my name is too long. My Instagram is @coincidence_cosplay, and my website is www.coincidencecosplay.com with an Etsy shop at etsy.com/shop/coincidencecosplay. And then my husband's Magic the Gathering website is deckplan.io. So if you want to go support him and build your deck plan there, then do it at Deckplan. So yes. Anyway.
Plan your deck at Deckplan.
Plan it.
That's a free slogan for you. You're welcome.
Yes.
Jordan, how about you? Where can we find your work, and what do you got going on lately?
When I'm not being consumed by Hades, because again, seriously, that game is the most addictive thing I've played in quite some time. Not since Civ 4 have I been this consumed by a game in a while.
How late did you stay up the other night?
Well, so my plan was to go to bed at 1 a.m. because I was like, it's the weekend. I'm going to play this. It's going to be good. And then I looked at the clock and it was somehow 4 in the morning.
Ooh.
I was not as productive the next day, let me tell you. Anyway, when I'm not doing that, I'm doing a bunch of amiibo tournaments. But on Fridays, we've been playing Banjo-Kazooie. We just got through Clanker's Cavern, where I spent an embarrassing length of time looking for a Switch that did not exist. I don't remember the game as well as I thought I did. I have a lot of false memories. But the exciting part is I did the math, and if we stick to the schedule, I might beat Banjo-Kazooie on the day of my 800th stream. So you all should be showing up on Friday mornings at, see, that's 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern? 10, 11, 12. Yes, 1 p.m. Eastern. On Fridays, we're playing Banjo-Kazooie, and we're having just the best time yahutting everywhere.
And speaking of Friday mornings, I actually have another podcast with my friend Dylan that comes out on Friday mornings. It's called The Innkeeper's Table. And we talk about board games. It's a lot of fun. We really enjoy board games. And our most recent episode, we highlighted a game mechanic. We talked about hidden movement games, which is, where a character, one of the players is moving around the board, one or more players is moving around the board, and somebody else has no idea where on the board they are. It's done in a lot of different ways depending on the different games. It was an interesting conversation. And the next episode we've got coming out this coming Friday, we actually spotlighted a specific game with this hidden movement mechanic. It's called Spectre Ops. One of the characters is playing an agent who snuck into this high-tech facility, and they're trying to complete objectives without being discovered. And the other players are hunters who are trying to track them down and take them out. It's in like this dystopian future type thing. Fun game. Lots of fun. I do have several board game reviews over on www.innkeeperstable.com, and I post about games on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at @InnkeepersTable. For those of you who want to support the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, but you can't become a patron, let your friends know about the show. Just tell them, hey, tell them about us. If you have friends who love the Cosmere and might be interested, let them know about us. If you have friends who don't know about the Cosmere, tell them about the Cosmere. Then get them all the way through it, and then tell them about us.
Or just tell them about us, and just tell them we're really interesting people.
But we're not spoiler free, Jordan. We want them to get through the Cosmere.
Well, no, but we've told them all these wonderful other avenues that they can reach us. And so if you think that they're into cosplay, why not send them to the Coincidence Cosplay?
Yes.
That's true. If they like board games, if they like video games and Smash Brothers and Amiibo in particular, we've got all sorts of fun places that you can send them. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and to like and subscribe over on youtube.com/Cosmere Studies. And if you want to toss us a good review wherever you listen to us, please do that. We would love to get a 5-star review from you and hear your thoughts about the show. Before we sign off, final thoughts.
Read the Decade Cycle.
Okay.
It's a good book. It's like 7 books, and it's a little bit older, but it's still really good. And there's a dog. I love the dog. So
okay.
Yes.
Jordan, how about you?
I don't have anything where I can recommend And There's a Dog other than surprisingly Hades, where there is a dog.
I was going to say that there is a dog.
It's a
three-headed
dog,
one.
right?
Yep. But no. I like that Brandon is analytical enough that he can break these down into rules that are easier for people like me who I don't tend to read books. Like, this is a new thing for me. Brandon's the first one that I've really gotten into in quite a while.
Sorry, my dog is bad. It's the first one. Continue talking, Jordan.
All right. And so him breaking it down like this makes me think of it in ways that I wouldn't do I wouldn't analyze it like this otherwise. And it's just very clear that Brandon not only has, but has worked out the mechanics in such a way that he can then explain it to us mere mortals.
Yeah. And one of the things that he's mentioned in the essay, which is absolutely worth reading. So if you haven't read his essay on the Sanderson Second Law, go check it out.
It's really
But
short,
he talks
so
about,
it's not a huge commitment either.
Unlike most things Brandon writes.
He talks about how these are rules for writers. A lot of these things are things that readers may not probably won't pick up on. There are some people read in a certain way where they do pick up on this, but most readers won't. A lot. It's just. But readers will pick up on, oh, this is good. Oh, this makes sense. And these are ways to make a cohesive story, a story that will hold people's interest, a story that's worth telling. And also, again, these aren't exclusively for Magic systems. This is for storytelling as a whole. Limitations in Magic are a lot easier to point out and just specifically say, there's this limitation, but they're around in real life. Everybody has their weaknesses. Everybody has their things that hold them back. And again, that's what creates a good story, because that's a part of what creates a good story, because you can see how they face these limitations, how they handle them, how they live with them. And so it's beyond just Magic. This applies to storytelling and even life. In addition to the live episodes of the show that stream on twitch.tv/Innkeeper's Table every 2 weeks on Monday nights at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, listeners can find our videos on YouTube or audio versions of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and just about any other service that carries podcasts by searching for Cosmere Studies. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under the profile @Cosmere Studies. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions for the show, email them to cosmerestudies@gmail.com. For our next episode, we are going to dig through the writings of a herald. That is to say, we're going to be reading the excerpts from Kalak's journal in the epigraphs of Rhythm of War. So be here for the live recording in 2 weeks on April 26, 2021 at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 p.m. Eastern at www.twitch.tv/Innkeeper's Table. Until then, on behalf of Amy, Jordan, and myself, thanks for listening, and remember,
there's always another secret.